Good morning, Dr. Stevens.
Good morning.
Can you hear me and see me?
I can. Can you hear and see
Yeah.
me?
Yes, we can. Can I request Vidula to please share her screen? How
Yes,
are you
Pradnya, I
doing,
can.
Dr. Stevens?
Good. You?
Yeah, we are also fine.
Morning, Ashley.
Hey, morning, Premnath.
Pradnya, you let me know if my screen is visible.
Yes, Vidula, it's
Yeah.
visible. Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome and good evening to all the participants who have joined the session today. Today we are starting with the 2 days workshop on technology valuation and IP due diligence by Dr. Ashley Stevens. I'll very quickly give you an introduction to Venture Center TechX and introduce the speaker for the 2 sessions that we are going to have today and tomorrow. Not wasting much of your time, and I'll then hand over the floor to Dr. Stevens. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat box. We will take all the questions towards the end of the session. So Venture Center, it is a technology business incubator which is located at NZ Innovation Park, Pune. And next slide, please. We are incorporated as a Section 8 not-for-profit company back in 2007, and we are hosted by CSIR NCL, and we are the first incubator in the CSIR family. We are also approved by NSTEDB and BIRAC and are recognized by DSIR and DIPP. We are CREDAL accredited NPO and are eligible for CSR funding as a charitable organization. We also have many awards to our credit. To name a few, our National Award for Technology Business Incubator, Asian Incubator of the Year Award, and the very latest one that we have won is National Entrepreneurship Award in 2019. Next slide, please. At Venture Center, we work with a mission to nucleate and nurture technology-based enterprises for India by leveraging the scientific and engineering competencies of the institutions in the region. We are sector agnostic, but there are certain areas where we give thrust upon or where our expertise lies in is healthcare, biomed, environment, sustainability, then engineering, electronics, agro, secondary agriculture, food and nutrition, so on and so forth. Next slide, please. Today's session and tomorrow's session, we are organizing under our Regional Technology Transfer Office, which is TechX. Next slide, please. We facilitate win-win technology commercialization partnerships. We are a resource center of Venture Center, and being Regional Technology Transfer Office, we have a mandate to scout and promote technologies in the western part of India, which have 4 states under it: Goa, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh. We are being funded and supported by BIRAC under their National Biopharma Mission. At TechX, we offer various services. Next slide, please. There are 3 kinds of services that we have come up with. One is more towards technology commercialization, where we help in technology marketing, technology transfer, deal structuring, agreements, valuations, spin-off, and new venture creation. The second bucket, we have policies for IP protection, decision support, and all kinds of IP support. We have very good team of IP experts who are patent agents in our team who help with all kinds of IP services. We also have access to 2 paid databases on basis of which we offer our search and analytics support. We also help institutes to put in place the policies and mechanisms for doing their IP protection and whatever support is required. The third bucket is of industry and academia partnering, where we help this Indian industry academia technology partnership by putting in place mechanisms and contract management. We also offer technology scouting and open innovation services under this bucket. With this brief introduction about TechX and Venture Center, I would now introduce our speaker for today and tomorrow's session, Dr. Ashley Stevens. He is currently President, Focus IP Group LLC in USA. The Focus IP Group, it provides a variety of consulting services in intellectual property matters, including serving as an expert witness in IP disputes, technology scouting, technology transfer, and teaching the commercialization of early stage technologies. For 15 years, Dr. Stevens led Boston University's Office of Technology Transfer. He then became Special Assistant to the Vice President for Research for 2 years before retiring from full time employment at BU. Before joining Boston University, he was also director of the Office of Technology Transfer at Dana Faber Cancer Institute, which is a teaching affiliate of the Harvard Medical School. During his tenure at Boston University, the Office of Technology Development spun out over 50 companies based on the university's research. Prior to entering the technology transfer profession, Dr. Stevens worked in the biotechnology industry for nearly 10 years. He was a co-founder of Kytogenetics Incorporated, of which he is still a director, was co-founder of GenMap Incorporated, and was vice president of business development for Biotechnica International. Dr. Stevens publishes and lectures frequently on many aspects of technology transfer, including the Bayh-Dole Act, the economic impact of technology transfer, and its role in economic development, the contribution of academia to the discovery of new drugs and vaccines, the role of technology transfer in global health and technology valuation. He has the recipient. He was a recipient of the Bayh-Dole Award at the Association of University Technology Managers, which is Autumn 2007 annual meeting, and became president of Autumn in March 2010. He is also active in the Licensing Executives Society and the Mass Bio. Dr. Stevens holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Natural Sciences, a Master of Arts, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Physical Chemistry from Oxford University. He is a certified licensing professional and a registered technology transfer professional. With this brief introduction to today's speaker, Dr. Stevens, I would now request him to start with this first session, which is on technology valuation. Dr. Stevens, kindly share your screen and start your session.
Can you see that?
Yeah, we can see it and
you
we
can
hear
hear
you
me.
as well.
Good.
Yeah.
So today I'm going to talk about valuing technologies. First of all, I want to thank TechX for inviting me and the various other people who support this program, and TechX and the Venture Center. So if you think about how we go about transferring a technology, some scientist identifies they've made a discovery. They disclose it to the people responsible for transferring it. And the first thing to do is to evaluate the technology to assess its commercial importance. Then you start marketing it. Hopefully you then get a company expresses interest, you negotiate a deal, and you finish up with a signed license agreement. And there are a couple of analyses you need to do along the way. Before you start marketing it, you need to develop your licensing strategy. And then before you start your negotiations, you need to value the technology. So today I'm going to talk about what we mean about valuation and pricing, how you extract value in a license. We'll talk about the concepts of risk and value, critically important concepts. We'll look at some valuation methodologies, look at the cost method, comparables, rules of thumb, equity. And let's start by talking about valuation. What do we mean by valuation? Well, there are various techniques for valuation. Frankly, they'll probably give you different answers in the different cases, and they're just an opinion. Think about it. You decide you want to sell your house. You look around and you come up with what you want for it, and you put it on the market at that price. That's your expectation. There's no certainty that you're going to get that price. You may get less. These days in the United States, in the current pandemic, you'll probably get more than what you asked for it. Pricing, on the other hand, is a negotiation. The seller has their opinion on what it's worth. The buyer has their opinion on what they're prepared to pay, and they have a negotiation. If it's a successful negotiation, they meet somewhere. Probably, in reality, somewhere between the seller's expectation and the buyer's willingness to pay. And at the end of the day, it's a commitment. And the first fundamental lesson I want you to take away from this lecture is that if you have a basis for your valuation, you will negotiate those bases in your negotiations. And that is a rational negotiation. It may be tough, but it is rational. Without a valuation basis, you negotiate from emotion, and that is an ugly negotiation. So this lecture is very, very personal to me. If you look at the copyright notice down here, you'll see it starts in 1993. Most of my lectures, the copyright notice starts in 2005, which is when I started teaching at Boston University's School of Management. This one I started in 1993, and I'll tell you why. In the introduction, you were told that I joined the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute as its first director of technology transfer in, when was it? April 1991. And I found sitting in my inbox there that I had a hot technology. Now, the definition of a hot academic technology came years and years and years ago from Lita Nelson, who for 30 years ran the tech transfer office at MIT. And she defined a hot academic technology as one that two companies were interested in. Frankly, in academic technology transfer, we only license about a quarter of the invention disclosures we get. And if you get one company interested, whoopee, hooray, and off we go. And that will obviously weaken your negotiating position, because you can't threaten to walk away and mean it, because you have no other alternative tucked up your back pocket. So your negotiating position is weak. So you negotiate with that first party. So I found in my inbox at Dana-Farber what must have been a white hot technology, because I had 3 companies interested in it. The technology was a cell surface adhesion molecule. They were very hot at the time. Ours was called L-selectin, or what was the other name for it? I'm blanking. Anyway, L-selectin, invented by Dr. Thomas Tedder, who is now and has been on the faculty of Duke University for many, many years. LAM1 was the other name of this technology. And I had 3 companies interested. So the first one was coming in from California to negotiate. So I had to come up with a proposal to put on the table. How on earth was I going to value it? So I spent 10 years in biotech. So I knew a number of people in big pharmaceutical companies in licensing. So I called all them up and said, hey, I've got this hot technology, LAM1, L-selectin, got this company coming in. What shall I ask for it? And they all said, beats me. So I had begun to get to know some people in academic technology transfer. So I called them up and said, hey, LAM1, L selected, what do I ask for it? And they all said, beats me. So there was this company, 2 people flying in from San Francisco, and I had to have a set of numbers ready. So I pulled some numbers out of the air, went into the meeting, we exchanged our pleasantries, and they said to me, so we're very interested in this technology and we'd like to negotiate a deal with you today. What are you looking for to license it? And I put my numbers on the table and they looked at me as if I had 2 heads and said, why do you think it's worth that much? So I said, well, we think this is a very important molecule. And they said, yes, so do we. That's why we're here. Why do you think it's worth that much? So all I could do was put on my most serious voice and say, well, we think this is a very important molecule. And they said, yes, we've agreed to that. But why do you think it's worth that much? What are you basing that on? What are you comparing it with? What comparable deals can you point to that have approached that sort of valuation? And of course, all I could do was say, well, we think this is a very important molecule. At which point they thanked me politely, got up, flew back to California, and I never, ever could get them back to the table. Now, luckily, as I said, I had these 2 other companies tucked up my back pocket, and we did a deal with one of them. And thank God for that. Otherwise, what turned out to be a very promising career in academic biotechnology transfer would likely have been cut very short had I messed up the only lead we had for the molecule. Thank goodness I had 3 companies. So this is the first takeaway. You must have some sort of basis for the value you are asking for your technology. So let's think about when you value technology. This slide took me about 2 years to write, to come up with the concepts behind this. Because after my experience with this company, I said, there's got to be a better way. There's got to be some ways to value technology. Now, in my defense, the first book on licensing valuation which was written by Richard Razgaitis, didn't appear till about, I think, 1998 or something. So this wasn't written down at the time. And if you think about it, so what I did was I started going to, back then there were 4 forums a year where technology transfer people came together. 2 were the 2 annual meetings of the Licensing Executive Society, and 2 were the annual meetings of Autumn, the Association of University Technology Managers. So I went to all 4 each year. And if I saw a workshop with the title, with the word valuation in its title, I was there sitting in the front row, notepad out, taking notes. And the trouble was, I was getting more confused, not less. These guys were using phrases like the excess return on intangible assets. And I'm thinking, how do I work out the excess return on the intangible asset of my patent application on LAM1 L selected? I was getting more confused, not enlightened. And slowly, after a couple of years, it came to me that what I was hearing these people talk about was when technology was being valued retrospectively. It was being valued by people in litigation over patent infringement litigation. And the key thing about this is the way litigation works, in the US at least, is that we have this incredible tool called discovery, when the lawyers for each side write to the other and ask for all the information that company has that may be helpful to their opponent in deciding the outcome of the case. And we take this very, very, very seriously. If you have subject matter that is really harmful to your side and you destroy it and you are discovered, the lawyers will be disbarred for life. So we take this very, very seriously. And what we are doing is establishing the value of that technology at a specific point in time. And this is an adversarial process where the outcome is imposed judicially. So there I am sitting in one of these workshops at LES, and this guy is going on about the excess return on intangible assets. And so sitting behind me in the next row was a lady from Sandoz Pharmaceuticals, before the merger with Ciba-Geigy to form Novartis. And I just thought, well, maybe it's we academic people don't understand this stuff. We're badly trained. And I leant back and said to her, do you use these valuation techniques? And she said to me, I don't even understand the terms he's using. And I felt much, much better, because I realized what we do in licensing is we value technology prospectively, in advance. And it's done by deal makers. And there is asymmetry of information. We on the academic side understand the technology best. The company understands the commercial potential best. And generally speaking, we don't get paid a lump sum up front. We have to extract the value over time. We'll talk in a minute about why we shouldn't try and extract the value up front in a single payment. So as I say, it took me a couple of years to come to this understanding. And as I said, the first book on this wasn't published till 4, 5, 6 years after I was undergoing this very painful lesson in licensing valuation. And finally, in licensing, this has got to be a win-win deal, because we are creating a relationship that, if the technology is successful, is going to last for however long the patents last, and maybe even longer. It's going to be a long relationship. So what do we mean by evaluation in the licensing context? I think it's a written analysis of what you believe the value of a technology to be. You've got to be prepared to give your valuation to the other side, identify where you got the data, discuss that data with them, modify your valuation based on your discussions with the other side. Maybe they have got a better source of data than you do. Maybe they argue, well, yes, I understand that methodology you've used, but we think in this particular context, this is the right methodology to use. And what do we mean by a license valuation? Constructing the various financial elements of a proposed license. Some combination of upfront payments, ongoing pre-commercialization payments, things like patent costs, milestone payments, annual minimum royalties, maybe research support. A critically important topic, sub-license income sharing. Maybe we're going to help manufacture the product, at least for some period of time. And then finally, the earned royalties or sales or profit sharing. In other words, the term sheet. So I want to talk now about the second key concept, and that's risk. There's all sorts of types of risk in developing technology. The R&D risk, the risk that it may just not work. Maybe you don't get FDA approval if it's a drug or diagnostic or device discovery. Maybe it's a standards risk where some IEEE standard setting organization endorses an approach that your approach is incompatible with. Manufacturability risk, it may work, but you just can't make it at a low enough cost. A marketing risk that, yep, yours is superior, but some inferior technology being proposed by a company that has much more resources than you can just steamroller its way into the market ahead of you. A competitive risk, a risk that some other company has things like patents that protect their approach, maybe that even stand between your approach and the marketplace. They've got broader patents that cover your technology. Overall, the statistics is that only 1 in 10,000 drug candidates make it to FDA approval. Only 1 in 3,000 raw ideas make it to market. And the concept that is really, really scary is that from 1/3 to 2/3 of new product launches, including those by big, sophisticated multinational companies, fail to recoup their investment in bringing them to market. And this leads to the second fundamental concept I want to leave you with today. And this is that value and risk are inversely related. As risk goes down, value goes up. And the implication of this is that we are licensing the technology right around here, at the very beginning, when risk is highest and hence value is lowest. And over time, the risk goes down, so the value goes up. And our job in licensing is to try and capture some of the increase in value here as the risk is reduced. This is why we should never seek to get paid in full upfront. So, as I said, it's a fundamental principle of license valuation. Don't try to get paid upfront in full. Our job is to extract the value over time, share in the growth in that value. And let me give you an example. I believe in India, you have this sports drink called Gatorade. Gatorade was invented by a guy called Robert Cade, who I had the privilege of meeting. He was the first urologist at the new University of Florida School of Medicine. And I don't have time to go into it, but he invented Gatorade, got patents on it, finished up owning them himself. And one of his former fellows had been treating, actually, in the very early days of dialysis, a vice president for the Stokely Van Camp company. Stokely Van Camp had been founded in the American Civil War, and it made canned baked beans and pork for the Union Army. They didn't sell drinks of any sort, but they were in the food and beverage industry. That was the best introduction that Cade had. And so he was negotiating with Alfred Stokely, obviously one of the family founders of the firm, and he offered them the rights to Gatorade for $1 million. And that consisted of patent applications, a trade secret formula, and the trademark. And Alfred Stokely declined. They said that the test market would cost $1 million, and so paying Cade $1 million would double their financial risk. And instead, they said, well, we won't pay you $1 million up front, but we will pay you royalties. So if we're successful, you'll be successful. And to date, Stokely Van Camp, who got bought by Quaker Oats, who got bought by Pepsi, have paid over $1 billion. Now, for various reasons, there were no US patents. The formula didn't stay a trade secret for very long because it was a very, very simple formula. And it was the trademark that was the big asset. And trademarks go on forever. And that's why the University of Florida is still getting paid royalties on Gatorade. So they could have had it for $1 million in 1963. Over the next, what are we doing? Almost 60 years now, they've paid over $1 billion. That's the difference between the value up front and the value extracted over time. So how do we approach valuation? We tend to have a series of techniques. There is the cost basis. There are rules of thumb. There are industry standards, things like rankings and rating, discounted cash flow, a Monte Carlo method where we adopt sophisticated mathematical approaches to evaluating risk. You can actually auction it and see what the market will pay, or you can use plain common sense. And finally, you can get your value out through equity by putting the technology in a company, getting an ownership stake, and seeing what that becomes worth. Today, we're going to talk about cost, rules of thumb, industry standards, and equity. So, cost. This is when you look back. And your valuation technique is you say, well, I know how much this technology cost me to develop, and I want to get a return on that cost. Now, the question you have to ask is the cost to develop something relevant when you're selling it today? I'll give you an example. I bought my house here in Winchester, Massachusetts in 1983. And you can look this up as a matter of public record. I paid, I think it was $156,500. And supposing I was going to sell the house today, would what I paid for it in 1983 and the fairly considerable sums my wife and I have put into improving the house and expanding it since, would they be remotely relevant to what I would put the house on the market for today? No. You can look it up. There's a website called Zillow that will estimate the value of any house in America. And it estimates the value of my house at well over $2 million today, which is totally unrelated to the $156,500 I paid and however much I have invested in it since. And ask yourself, would you want to or be able to sell a used lottery ticket for what you paid for it? If it was a winning lottery ticket, then you would obviously want to sell it for the value of those winnings. And if it's a losing lottery ticket, then, it's worth scrap paper. And the second argument you may get from a company is, well, it didn't actually cost the university anything to invent this because they got a grant from somebody to do it. And our response to that is, well, yes, we got reimbursed, but there was a cost. And the person who gave us that money wants us to get a good return on that investment. There are a couple of areas where cost does enter license negotiations. In academic institutions, one of the chief places, one of the first numbers we put on the table in our negotiations is here's what I paid for this technology, and I want to get my money back and a return on the sunk patent costs. That's usually the first ask in an academic licensing negotiation. And if you can't work out when you've been partnered with another academic institution, who should share in what percentage of the costs and the rewards of a technology going forward, then you could look at how much you each spent on your part of the collaboration to establish that. Let's look at the mechanics, the dynamics of a cost-driven negotiation. Let's say the seller says, well, here's what it cost me to develop this. Let's say it's $50. And I want to double my money. I want to make 100% return on that investment. So I'm going to offer this technology for $100. Let's say the buyer comes along and says, well, I could develop this myself. It'd take 2 or 3 years. Maybe it's going to cost me $40 to do that. I would have needed to license in a lot of intellectual property, and I can avoid those costs, and that's another $40. And that delay in getting to the marketplace, I value at yet another $40. So the total value to me of this technology is $120. Ha, you only want $100? Wow, great deal. Sign me up. Now let's look at a different buyer. This buyer says, well, I could do this myself in a year. Yeah, I'd have to license in a bit of stuff, but that's only another $20. And 1 year delay to the market, that's worth another $20. So I value this technology at $60. You want $100 for this? Well, no, I'll do it myself. No deal. So some examples of cost-based valuations. A couple of universities in the US have models for when companies want to sponsor research. For taxation reasons in the US, a university can't say, look, here's what I'm going to charge you for the research, and I'm going to own any intellectual property we invent, but you get the right to license it. And we'll decide that in the future. That makes companies uncomfortable. They think, well, if it works, I've paid for it, and now you can hold a gun to my head for the valuation, but we just can't set the value in advance. So the model these universities have come up with is the sponsor can get a fully paid up license for an extra 10% on top of the research costs. So 10% of the cost of the research is the fully paid up license valuation. And that's 10% of the fully loaded costs, including the indirect costs, which some people call overhead. Some disease foundations, foundations that have an interest in curing a particular disease, places like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, people like this, they have a funding model where they get royalties in return for their funding. The royalties are typically capped at 2 to 3 times the amount invested. So that's a couple of examples. And when you look at the deals between biotechnology companies and pharmaceutical companies, you often see valuations of $1 billion or more. And that is the sum of all of the pre-commercial and post-commercial fixed cost payments that the developer of the technology can potentially get if everything works. Doesn't include royalties. That's on top. So the second valuation technique we use is called the 25% rule. It's very what's the word I want? Well-established principle of technology valuation, also called the Goldscheider principle, after Robert Goldscheider, who defined it. And he said the licensor should receive 25% and the licensee should receive 75% of the pre-tax profits from a licensed product. This rule is based on empirical observations. I've always felt that it is very like the principle of semiconductor development, which says the number of chips that can be put, number of transistors that can be put on a semiconductor chip doubles every 2 to 2.5 years. One of those observations, there's no basis for it in science or economics, but Bob Noyce, the founder of Intel, made this observation as he looked at semiconductor development. And if you chart the rate of development of semiconductors since the early 1970s, when he enunciated it, that relationship has pretty much held true. So Robert Goldscheider had been hired by an American TV company called Philco. Philco was the leading US television company. It had the most sophisticated televisions. They wanted to preserve those technologies in the US market to maintain their leadership position. There were 3 incompatible TV standards in different parts of the world back then. So they were very happy to license these technologies out to companies making televisions outside the US using 2 of these other incompatible standards. And they hired Goldscheider to do this negotiation through their Swiss subsidiary. He had a complete IP portfolio, patents, ongoing know-how, trademarks, copyrighted product materials. And he was licensing these technologies out for 3 years. And what he found was the companies, you can imagine if the terms were not financially viable, you might say, well, look, it's only for 3 years. You know, it's taken me a year to discover that it's not financially viable. I can hang in there for 2 more years and renew the license at more appropriate terms down the road. But they weren't doing that. They were happily renewing their licenses. They were making a roughly 20% pre-tax profit, paying a 5% royalty, and they were either number 1 or number 2 in their domestic markets, despite strong competition. They happily renewed the licenses. And so Goldscheider concluded that the licenses resulted in successful long-term win-win relationships. And notice what I said at the beginning applied to the fully loaded pre-tax profits, not the gross profit margin. Now, in a license agreement, you want to express the royalties as a % of net sales. There are several reasons for that. You don't want, in general, to express it in terms of profit margins. The reason for that is that you have to be prepared to audit your licensee, and you're going to have to hire somebody to do that audit for you. He's going to go into your licensee and look at all sorts of numbers and make sure that the licensee has reported them accurately. And the more numbers he has to look up and verify, the more he's going to charge you. And obviously, if he's going to have to audit profits, that's a lot more things he's got to verify than if he's just auditing net sales. And the other issue is, you know, there could be a lot more discussion over whether certain items are allowable against the cost of a particular product that happens to be under your license. So you want to express your royalty rate as 25% of the expected profit margin. And it's a starting point for negotiation. I have tended to find it to be of limited value in academic licensing negotiations because of how early the technology is. I found it very helpful when I've been licensing to a new industry. You can go look at companies that work in that industry, look at what their profit margins are from their annual reports that are publicly published and so forth. But I think one of the major, in fact, probably the single most important technique for valuing early stage technologies is when you look around, look at the industry standards or comparables. As I said, if I'm selling my house, I'm really not going to use the cost method. You can't really look at the profitability issue when I'm selling a residential house. Now, if I'm selling a piece of commercial real estate, let's say a block of apartments, then somebody who is going to buy that is probably going to say, well, look, here's what I can rent out these apartments for. This is what I'm going to have to pay for a management company and my estimated annual maintenance and repair costs. So here's what I can make out of this house this apartment block each year. Here's what it's going to cost me to borrow the money to buy it. So here's what I can afford to pay. So in a commercial transaction, then you could maybe use the profitability method. But for a residential house that you're going to sell to somebody to live in, that's probably not going to be applicable. But in the US, real estate transactions are all a matter of public record. When the sale closes, you have to deposit the information in the local land registry, and you can look it up. That's what this website, Zillow.com, does. It looks at all the transactions that have closed in your neighborhood, and then it looks at the tax records to say, okay, how many bedrooms did this house have? How many bathrooms? How big is the house in square feet? How big is the piece of land it's built on in square feet? In comparable neighborhoods, in the town and as close to possible as where your house is. That's how I value my house, how I know that this website values my house at well over $2 million. And that's going to be in my top of my mind when I sit down with my seller. In fact, yesterday, I did this negotiation with a neighbor across the street who is moving. My son is moving back to town. We'd like to buy their house. He made an offer to me based on an appraisal, looking at comparable houses in our neighborhood. And I accepted that pricing. Very simple, painless negotiation. He wants more than I prefer to pay, but he has a very good basis for his valuation. I couldn't argue with it. I had no better information. And I said, yes, we accept that. So I think it's the most important valuation method for academic licensing. But what's the equivalent of the land registry in licensing? Where can you go to find valuations? Well, there may be an internal database. There are surveys, published surveys. There are public announcements. Word of mouth. You can call up people like I did when I was first licensing my L selected to see if anybody else can help me. There is litigation. You often get a lot of stuff becomes public knowledge in litigation. And then there is what I will call required disclosure, which is a very important source of information. So what do I mean by your internal database? Well, if you are working for an organization that's been licensing for a while, an established academic institution or maybe a corporation, you've done deals in this space. What were they done for? What have been the trends over time? You know, if you've been licensing in, let's say, research reagents, and about 5 years ago, you got a 7% royalty, a year or two later, you got an 8% royalty, a year or two later, you got a 9% royalty. That's kind of saying to you, I ain't hit the top yet. I should go for more. If you're on the other hand, you got 10% a couple of years ago, 10% the next year, 10% the year after that, that may be saying, you know, 10% is the established rate in that market segment. Published surveys, there aren't many of these, and a few of them are really, really old. There's some good recent ones that come from the Licensing Executive Society. And I think every serious licensing organization should be a member of LES. It's pretty cheap, $400 a year or so, and it gets you access to all their published surveys. It gets you access to their directory of people in companies who are people who are paid to answer their phone and respond to emails with technology offers. They have done a number of biopharmaceutical royalty rates. I think there's even another one they did in 2018. They've done one in the chemicals, energy, environmental, and materials, and they've done 2 high-tech surveys. Here's some data from their 2016 biopharmaceutical survey. They had 165 responses, 117 were complete and were used. Oncology, central nervous system, and infectious diseases were most prevalent. 84% of the deals were exclusive. 87% included US, 80% were global. 55% were early stage, preclinical, before IND filing, which is very helpful because most academic technologies are at that very early stage. 68% had expected peak sales of the drug of less than $500 million. And the royalty structures, 62% had fixed royalties, where you get the same royalty over time as, you know, for all sales, how little, how much, you get the same percentage. 27% had tiered royalties, where the royalty rate differs over time. Maybe you get a different royalty rate for low sales as you do for high sales. 9% had no royalty, 1% it was actually done as a profit share, and 8% had no royalties. As I said, you should be very cautious about basing your royalties on profit shares. In big partnerships between companies, they frequently do use profits shares. But in academic sectors, we should be very cautious about that. And 8%, as I said, had no royalties. They were fully paid up. Here is the royalty rates depending on the stage of the technology. And you can see that what happens is the royalties go up over time as the technology gets close to the marketplace. And you can see there is this very, very big jump between before the proof of concept and after. And proof of concept in pharmaceuticals is generally considered to be phase 2A of clinical testing, which is when you are looking for early indications of the efficacy of your drug. Now, if we were in a face-to-face class, before I put up this slide, I would have said, okay, what is your expectation? Should you get more royalties as the sales of your drug go up, or should you get less? And most people, when asked that question, typically say, oh, I think the royalty rate should go down. The thinking being, well, as you're getting paid more because the sales are going up, then you should get less of each sale because you shouldn't be greedy. The real answer goes back to our 25% rule. And the answer is that it's a fundamental principle of product marketing that the higher the sales of a product, the more profitable it is, because you have a bigger base of sales to spread your fixed costs, things like advertising, manufacturing, and so forth. And so higher sales levels are more profitable per unit than lower ones. And so what we're seeing here is that as the risk has gone down over time, the value has gone up, just like that early slide I showed you. And here's what you see from these deals. If these are the fixed rates, then these are the rates that vary with time. And you can see they all go up. You get a higher percentage of the higher levels of sales than you do at the lower levels of sales. Autumn has a database that's called Transact. We launched it in 2015. It's solely limited to academic deals. It's kind of a display to pay basis. If you contribute some of your deals, then you get access to the database. Otherwise, you can pay to get access. I think it has severe limitations. You have to select the subject matter from a pick list, and all of healthcare is the same code. And a search for a small molecule, the last time I looked, it yields over 80 hits, and 26 have royalty rates. And the other problem is you can't download all the data into a spreadsheet for analysis. You have to look at them one by one. So I think that this database is most useful for non-healthcare technologies. Now, where I want to spend most of the time is required disclosure. And this is information that is contained in Securities and Exchange Commission filings. So this is a US source of data by US companies. Now, because it's coming from the Securities and Exchange Commission, the company either has to be publicly traded or have filed to go public, because in the process of doing that, you have to submit your prospectus and the supporting information to the SEC. It becomes public, and if the company doesn't finish up going public because the investment bankers say, sorry, nobody wants to buy your stock, you can't get the information back. And the information is contained in exhibits to either the S1 filing, which is the prospectus for the initial public offering, or the 10K, which is the company's annual reports, or the 10Qs, which are the company's quarterly reports, or the 8Ks, which are material events that occur between quarterly filings. And the other limitation is that this is only for material transactions. And a material transaction is defined as one that impacts 10% of the company's sales or 5% of its assets. What this means in practical terms is that in a deal between a big company and a little company, then the technology is likely not to be material for the big company, but it will be material for the little company. So they're probably the ones who are going to have to file this with the SEC. And the other problem is you can redact commercially sensitive information like the financial terms from public disclosure. And Since we started filing these things electronically in, as I'll show you, in the mid-1990s, redaction has increased. The issue is that that redaction is only good for 5 years. And some databases are really good at going back and getting the unredacted data 5 years after the information was first filed. So what you have to do to apply this technique is identify comparable transactions that would be helpful models, determine if the agreement has been filed with the SEC, and then find it. So how do we do this? Well, you can access SEC filings yourself. The SEC has this system called EDGAR, which stands for the Electronic Data Gathering and Retrieval System. Very imaginative. That's a URL. It's getting a lot more user-friendly. Companies have been phased in progressively. When I say user-friendly, in the early days, what people filed was the HTML coding. It looked pretty ugly. These days, it comes up in HTML format and much easier to read. Companies were phased in progressively. The biggest companies started filing publicly in January 1994. This is the very early days of the World Wide Web. Mosaic 3.0, which was the first web browser that could display graphics, had only become available in mid-1993. So this was very cutting edge. And there were 3 steps, and the smallest companies had to file electronically from 1996 on. So we have got over 25 years of data there. And for transactions before these dates, an early 10K will show you whether it was filed in paper copy. Some of the databases define comparables for technologies in the physical and engineering and computer sciences. These are some of the databases. In the life sciences, Clarivate, which used to be called Recap, Bioscience Advisors, which was founded by the guy who created Recap and sold it, IQVIA, which used to be called Pharma Deals, and Strategic Transactions, which bought a database from a company called Windover. All of these charge either per agreement or an annual subscription, and those subscriptions are not cheap. And your best approach may be to find a consulting company that has a subscription and get them to value this particular technology. I periodically have subscriptions and do those kind of things at a reasonable rate. Some of them, however, let you identify agreements before you have to pay. And so you could do that and then find yourself through the SEC. So you could use a no-cost strategy. You could search using tech agreements in physical sciences or Windover, the strategic transactions, as it now is in life sciences, and then find the agreement using the SEC. Then I said the high cost is to take a subscription to Clarivate or Bioscience Advisors. They are the best 2 at getting unredacted data after 5 years. And as I said, an alternative is use consultant. Let me give you an example. Small interfering RNA. Some of the tools, Clarivate, Edgar. Here is what the Clarivate front page looks like. Here is, we type in the technology, siRNA, small interfering RNA, and we get this there we go. We get this result that comes up, and hang on. you can see I got 548 hits from this search. And here is this magical button called download, which lets you download the results of your search into an Excel spreadsheet. And here's what it looks like. You can see, sorry, oops. I have some of the Zoom stuff obscuring my screen here. And you can see we get this column that identifies the type of licensor, and you can see there is this category of academic licensors. So if I'm an academic institution with an siRNA technology, that would be a very useful subset. Here's what I found. You find there are 36 fields of results covering who the partners are, the technology, the legal components of the deal. You know, is there a license agreement? Is there an option? Is there equity? Is there research? The financial terms, the actual documents may be available, the stage of development, and so on. So of my 548 deals, 109 had some financial information, 25 had royalty information, and 164 were public sector research institutions, universities, teaching hospitals, independent, not-profit labs, government labs, and so on. 122 of those were academic, 13 were government agencies, 29 were nonprofits, 41 had some financial information, 6 had royalty information running from 1 to 10%, 6 had license agreements that you could actually download and read, of which 4 were unredacted. Pretty helpful. 2 were redacted. So these are some of the results I find. You can see the royalty rates over there on the right. One of the ones that looked pretty helpful was the University of Illinois licensing to a company called Acuity. Its technology was at discovery stage. It was licensed in August of 2006, valued at $2.5 million in total, of which $30,000 was upfront, $245 million in milestone payments, and a 3% royalty rate. Now, I found that a lot has been lost as the recap database has been repeatedly sold and reformatted. The unredacted copy of that's available. You can no longer get the redacted copy, and that was available in the recap and Thompson voice versions. Only the redacted version of the Acuity University of Illinois deal is available today. And this is from the Thomson Reuters days. And I've changed my subscription to this new database, Bioscience Advisors. So here's what Clarivate used to have, a picture of the deal, a pretty simple deal. University of Illinois license of the technology, and there's the components of the deal. You can actually look at, they abstract elements of the deals and put it in this standard format. And you can actually look at the agreement. Here it is, unredacted. And down in Article 3, you can see all these royalty provisions, these milestone payments upfront, and a little lower down the royalty rates. And it turns out that the University of Illinois got an equity stake in this company. And Acuity did a reverse merger to go public, and that's where these transaction documents are available. The company's name is OPCO. We can go to Edgar and pull up OPCO, and it turns out that the license deals are in 8K filing they did, and you can look these up. It was their 8K in April of 2007, and you pull it up, and in the exhibits, we can see all these technology license agreements. These turn out to be our University of Illinois ones, and here's some from the University of Pennsylvania, and amendments to them. And you can put it down. Here it is. Here's those license terms again. How do we value the technology, the stock that the University of Illinois got? Well, you can go to the company's most recent 10Q to get the number of shares outstanding. And I get share prices from the NASDAQ database. It has all share prices listed on public US stock exchanges, not just NASDAQ. Here's OPCO's most recent 10K. They have 615 million shares outstanding. Here's where we get their stock price. That's what it looks like on the day I did this, 237. And here's a 1-year history. And here's a 10-year history. You can see it started out low, it went up to a peak. This is a logarithmic scale. So it's gone from a peak of about $18, $20 down to a couple of dollars. I hope we didn't have this in our retirement portfolio. I think we might have had some sleepless nights if we bought here and seen it go down this much. There you go. And on this day, the value of OPCO was $2.37 times 615 million, which is about $1.5 billion. And if University of Illinois still owned 3%, it would have been worth $44 million. Now, there is a newer way to use SEC filings. I mean, you'd have had to be pretty good to find that 8K filing that OPCO had disclosed those documents in. And it's been my observation over the last few years that companies seem to be making much more detailed disclosures of deal terms in their 10Ks. And 10Ks are much easier to find and search than attached agreements. So here is an example of a consulting agreement I had for an Asian university which was developing a cellular therapy. And the model I used was chimeric antigen receptor T cells, CAR Ts. And some of the leading US companies in this are Juno Therapeutics, which had 5 academic stage deal terms identified in their 10K. And one of these was the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, $250,000 up front, these annual maintenance fees, milestone payments of $6.75 million per licensed product. And it said low single-digit royalties. What does that mean? My guess is that means 3 to 4%, maybe 2 to 4%. And then a portion of the payments from sublicenses on a tiered basis up to a cap. There was a deal with Memorial Sloan Kettering, upfront payment of $6.9 million. Here's the annual minimums. It said mid to high single stage royalties on annual net sales, which I think probably means somewhere in the range of 5, which would be mid, to 9, which would be high single digits. And then again, these milestone payments. Seattle Children's Research Institute, $200,000 up front. Here's the annual minimums, low single digit royalties based on annual net sales, again, 2 to 4%. And then milestone payments for those same 2 products, totaling 13.3 million, so additive. And then a percentage of milestone payments up to an aggregate of 15 million. As I said, it's additive to the Hutchinson deal. St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, big one, this, upfront payment of 25 million, low single-digit royalties, again, 2 to 4%. These are the annual minimums, somewhat higher. Again, milestone payments of 62.5 million for these 2. Percentage of sublicense income and settle payments, again, also additive to the Fred Hutchinson. So there was lawsuit between Juno and Kite. Juno had rights to Sloan Kettering's patents, and they sued Kite over Kite's Yescarta, which was the first chimeric antigen T cell receptor to get FDA approval, got approved in October 2017, and the lawsuit followed. This was the patent, expires May of 2023. Kite got bought by Gilead for $11.9 billion in August of 2017. And Juno got bought by Celgene, 6 months later for $9 billion. So you can see this is a pretty high profitability area of the market. And then Celgene themselves got bought a year later by Bristol Myers Squibb for $74 billion. As I said, Yescarta was approved in October 2017 for relapsed or refractory large B-cell lymphoma. It had 2019 sales of 489 million and a forecast of 1.5 billion for 2022. And in the lawsuit, Bristol Myers Squibb got awarded $752 million in damages in December 2019. And we can start to create a model here. Here's Yescarta sales. These figures I got from public documents. And here is the forecast for 2022, which was from a securities analyst. This was what I calculated for the first 5 months of 2023 till the patent expired. And then I extrapolated from here to get these figures for 2020 and 2021. And I applied a royalty rate of 7%. I used a discount rate of 11%. And these are the discounted royalties I got. And this is what, came up with an answer of $729 million as the value today of, in 2019, of this royalty stream. But the answer we got from the lawsuit was $752 million. And you can use the solution finding formula function in Excel to say, okay, what royalty rate does it take to generate a net present value of $752 million? And the answer is 18.9%. How do we reconcile this? So the Juno Memorial Sloan Kettering license was 5 to 9%. The litigation was 18.9%. Why the difference? Well, in litigation, the patent is presumed to be valid infringed. In licensing, there is always uncertainty as to its validity. In litigation, royalty is determined on the eve of infringement, which is the later of the patent issuance and the product launch. So here, licensing is done at a much earlier stage. And royalty rates for marketed products are much higher than for preclinical and phase 1 products. We saw that in our LES survey example. So that's why we got 3 times the royalty rate almost that our comparables would have indicated, because the patent is presumed to be valid because it survived the litigation, and the royalty rate was determined on when the product was launched. Equity. This is when you extract your value by licensing to a startup. In most countries, when a university starts a company to develop a technology, it gets an ownership stake instead of an upfront fee. You normally get all the other royalty terms you expect: milestones, annual minimums, running royalties, etc. And we've proposed a standard formula for the distribution of equity in startups. The inventor gets 25%, university gets 25%, management team gets 25%, and the investors get 25%. And that's half to the university, half to the private sector, which is putting all the money up. And it's based on a UK model where there's an even split between the professor and the university. And there's a model that Columbia University does, which was we get a standard equity model for every startup. For all sectors, we get a 5% ownership stake, which is maintained at 5% until the company has closed a Series A financing typical for that sector. And then the royalty terms vary by sector, higher for software and pharmaceuticals, lower things for like engineering and manufacturing. As I said, the royalty rate depends on the profitability in that sector, and both sides, the university and the company, look for comparable examples, bring them to the table, and sit down and negotiate the relevancy. As more investors are brought in, more shares are issued, everybody gets diluted. As more employees are brought in, more shares are issued, everybody gets diluted some more. And if all else fails, 5% for healthcare discoveries at least. And this is a venerable royalty rate. Here is a license agreement, actually called an indenture, between the University of Toronto and the Eli Lilly Company, dated from 1922. I don't know whether anyone can guess what this license is for. University of Toronto, 1922, Eli Lilly. This is the original license for insulin. And Eli Lilly agreed to pay a 5% royalty for a 1-year exclusive license. And you will find an awful lot of academic licenses at that 5% level. We saw a 5% equity stake in the Columbia model. And another approach is what we call list pricing. As you get more familiar with tech transfer and you do more deals, you'll have a good feel for what technologies are worth, and you won't need to go through a specific valuation exercise for each one. If you want more information, this talk has been published by the World Intellectual Property Organization. If you go to their website, that's the URL, or you can go to their front page and just put my name in the search bar, and it will bring up the report. And thank you for the listening. And if we have questions, I think we have some time to take those questions.
Thank you, Ashley. I would request people to put down the questions on the chat box. In the meantime, I have a couple. By the way, this is 100 years of the discovery of insulin. And you know, this is this year, so good example, appropriate one. From what I understand, they also had, did they also have a license with Novo Nordisk, or it was only Lilly? And why was it only 1 year?
So back in really until quite recently, academics were very reluctant to give exclusive licenses in the life sciences space. They felt that life-saving technologies should be available to anybody. Now, that's a wonderful concept in practice. It was the US government's policy when it owned any inventions made with government funding at US universities. It was the policy that got overturned in Bayh-Dole. Because yes, you can give access to everybody. The problem is that nobody is going to make the investment in developing a technology, the high risk investment, if they think their competitors can come and get a license on the same terms once they've made that investment and prove them the technology works. And so exclusivity is needed to induce people to make that investment. And it took a long time for people to come to that realization. The University of Toronto wanted to use the patents to enforce quality standards, to get patents on manufacturing processes and make sure that people use their good methodology. And they use their patents to do that. So Lilly got a 1-year exclusive to induce them to do the development work, scale it up, make quality insulin available. And after that, they licensed other people at the same royalty terms. They gave the rights to the British Commonwealth, to the Medical Research Council in the UK, and they also gave a license to Nordisk Laboratory to do it in Denmark. So it tracks back to that. They happen to have a wholly owned company called Connaught Laboratories, which made biologic materials, antitoxins, things like that. And they developed insulin for the Canadian market. And the University of Toronto eventually sold Connaught for quite a good sum.
Okay. Just a question on models for pricing a technology license that's built into a sponsored research project. If a company approaches an academic lab and says that, look, this is the work that we want done, right? The research work. Only thing is whatever comes out of it, we want an exclusive, fully paid license. How do you price that into your project usually? And is it something where the same principles will apply, or you'll use a different set of rules?
Well, I think we actually covered a specific example of that. University of Minnesota and Penn State. Their valuation is, here's the cost to us of doing the research. And you have to understand that in the US, and I think this is probably pretty universal, universities are trained to do their research at cost. You calculate the direct costs, the amount of researchers' time, the chemical costs, equipment costs, etc. And then we add a percentage for the indirect costs, the cost to operate the building, the costs of security, the cost of the facilities, things like that, that you can't allocate to specific research projects. And we call that the indirect costs. And we add the two together, and that's what we do the research for. But we're doing it at cost, we're not making a profit. And so the University of Penn State and the University of Michigan, Minnesota's model says, well, we'll take that complete cost and we're going to want a 10% of that will be our fully paid up cost. You could argue, well, why 10? Why not 25? In my cost-based pricing, I used 100% markup. But have a basis for your valuation. As I said, we have these two models sitting out there in the public domain that say a 10% markup is what some people have done.
But 10% markup for all rights to IP and so on?
That is one model that's out there. Yep.
Oh, okay. That doesn't sound very, I mean, I'm a little surprised. I thought it was too low because IP might be quite valuable, right? So anyway, yeah. And are there, you showed some thumb rules about, I think, about the stage of development. So are there thumb rules relating to patent status, geographical coverage, and also technology readiness levels in other technologies, other than health, life sciences?
I'm not aware of any data where people have said, in some ICT technology, if it's at TRL2, you get this. If it's at TRL8, you get that. But the concepts of the closer to market, the lower the risk, and hence the higher return should certainly apply.
And would you capture that in the form of higher royalty rates or higher upfronts? According to you,
So
your view.
if you're licensing it at the TRL2 stage, then you would certainly want to see some sort of milestone payments as it moves up the TRL scale.
Mhm.
And I think you're going to have to license it at your royalty rate appropriate to TRL2. If, on the other hand, you're licensing it at TRL8, but you have a comparable that was done at TRL2, then you would say, well, at this TRL2, you got a 2% royalty rate, but I'm TRL8. So I want, I don't know, 6%. I think the value has tripled by getting that much closer to market. But you have got a basis for your proposal, and you can debate with them whether that TRL2 comparable is a good one, and whether 3 times the royalty rate is a fair multiple for the reduction in risk.
Okay. Actually, I think it's already 7:05, so I don't want to take too much time. But one last point: if you have negotiated something from the US, say, how would you extrapolate it for other regions where you have patent protection?
One of the reasons I think that royalty rates might be higher in the US is that we have no control on drug pricing. And so you see some very, very high prices for drugs. You can see that in the sales for Yes Carter that I showed. And I think those licensing provisions that I showed you for the academic deals pertaining to CAR-Ts are substantially higher than rates you used to see for antibodies and small drugs coming out of academic institutions. And I think that's because CAR-Ts sell at very, very high prices. I think if you look at regions where drug prices are lower, Europe, maybe Canada, where there are controls, some of the emerging economies where things are just, there's government reimbursement and rates are lower, then you may have to say, well, the profit margin comes down, so the royalty terms have to come down.
Okay, thank you. Pragna, there seems to be one last question, then we can close.
Okay.
Yeah. To Stevens, there is one last question. Does a status of patent matters in technology valuation?
Well, yes, obviously, the more countries you have filings in, then the more, the broader the reach of your license, because you're going to be offering your licensee the ability to exclude others in those market segments. Patent filings and prosecution are public across the world these days. After 18 months, your application publishes, and you can start to see how the examiner is reacting. That is publicly available. So if you license, after the initial office action, probably the examiner has rejected all your claims in the initial office action. You're at that point, if I'm a licensee, and say, look, this ain't looking too good for your technology. So I'm not prepared to pay anything, or very low. As the prosecution proceeds and the examiner is starting to say, well, okay, I'm only going to disallow these claims, then your value is going up. I helped a professor at a major teaching hospital here in Boston. He'd invented a technology, disclosed it, said, give it back to me. And the hospital did, but said, we want to keep using it for ourselves. That seemed a fair deal. The hospital wanted to use it outside of its own system, and they couldn't come to terms. And so the professor came to me for help, and we weren't doing well at the patent office. We kept getting rejected. And it seemed to me that we just needed to keep that patent alive and keep prosecuting it. So that was part of my strategy in the negotiation. And suddenly we got a very good offer from the hospital, which we accepted, did the deal. And the hospital took over prosecution of the patent. And lo and behold, the patent issued a couple of years later. And so we knew that that had been a good patent strategy. Just keep pushing away on the patent protection.
Mhm. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Pragna, you're on mute. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Stevens, for the wonderful session and the question and answers that have happened after that session. So I think we'll close the session for today and we'll reassemble tomorrow at the same time for the next session on IP due diligence.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Good.
Good night.
Thank you.